Alright, let's give this a second. There's my nice background. And let us start Confucius. Alright, happy September, everybody. Today, Confucius 2. Now, this is the honors section, which means we're going in depth into Confucius. So I think we're doing four total classes on him. So right now, we are working our way through D.C. Lau's translation's introduction. So this is the Penguin Classics. Lau is I think he's dead now, but he still is the most eminent Confucius scholar in English. He might be one of the most eminent Confucian scholars in the world, because they're not very popular in China. So they tend to be in Japan, Korea, Taiwan. But, yeah. I would have said Hong Kong, but, that's changed. Here's my sympathetic choke. Alright, looks like the stream's good. So let's get started. Okay. So, again, this is just, strictly speaking, for those people who didn't have the book yet, to remind you, we are literally just going over the introduction. So, you can catch up for puff stuff you didn't miss once you get the book, but from next class we'll be into the core material. And then it'll generally be like, oh, that's why Professor Zeiser went over all of it. Yes. Alright, so last time we did just basic morality and kind of the basics of Confucius' system. Now, we're going to get more into, and we talked about heaven and all the virtues, and destiny. Now we're going to get into, like, how do we make good people? Now, in Western, let me say it this way, in modern Western philosophy, it is much less concerned with the hows to do things. Like, how do we make good people? It's just like, what are good people? Now, the reason a lot of the how went away, I've never seen it theorized well, but it's something like, since the Enlightenment, there's been a separation between making good people and understanding moral systems. Whereas before that, they were the same. Why? Well, in the West, the church handled it, right? Religion was involved with philosophy, and it still is, but the secular world tried to divorce itself from that. In Asia, up until the 20th century, they're the same thing. Does that make sense? Like, Confucius is religion and philosophy together. It's both how do you make good men, and what does it mean to be good? They're the same group of people we're asking and answering those questions, where in the West there's been 400-500 years of trying to force a difference. What I mean is, secularists are trying to force a difference. The church is still basically answering that question. Just people like to pretend the church doesn't exist. And if research is anything to go by, my average freshman poll, I'll probably do a poll once we get a couple weeks into the semester. Anonymous, of course. And that's my son crying, if you hear him. He runs and runs and runs and runs into something. Very common. So, okay. But we're going to do a poll, and I'm just curious of your general affiliation. So far in the past, I would say my freshman classes are somewhere between 60 and 75% religious. So it's still pretty common. Alright, so let's get on in. Here we go. Alright, so we talked about the ethics. Then, once we get into the ethics, we then have to answer, let me get my notes out, we have to answer then, how do we make gentlemen? And then what do these gentlemen affect in government, right? That's our next questions, and I'm getting all my notes out. Here we go. Great. And, yeah, good. A lot of my notes are pretty obvious. Okay, so let's jump on in. So firstly, the ultimate realization, and this is just straight from D.C. Lau, is the ultimate realization of this moral system is gentlemen in government. So as we talked about a little bit last time, like the 5 relationships and morality, all of this, every relationship is echoes of the 5 relationships. So especially father-son, mother-daughter, ruler-subject. So, but for these moral men that Confucius was trying to make, the ultimate realization of morality is these men he's trying to create in the government. That is the goal of his system. So, if you want to have the ultimate version of this, they have to actually be ruling. Otherwise, you haven't really actuated the system he was trying to make. So, I'm just organizing. Perfect. Here we go. Okay. So, and then he also points out, though, at the same time, however, D.C. Lau points this out, but it's all over Confucius. Self-cultivation is not a means to an end. What he means is you're not trying to be moral to get a result, because then you would be moral, right? We talked about that day one, that for Confucius, being good morally is the end. But to be the most good, you have to use your goodness to increase the well-being of everyone. That's what he means. And the quote here is from hence Confucius said, quote, it is not easy to find a man who can study for 3 years without thinking about earning a salary. Many of you are probably very sympathetic with that. Oh, and then he said he showed approval when somebody who was offered a post considered himself not yet ready. And he points out too, just as when someone's studying, they are studying for a career. And then, quote, this is D.C. Lau, studying and holding of office are the twin activities that are inseparable from the concept of a gentleman. And to quote Confucius again, when a man is in office, finds that he can no more cope with his duties than he studies. And when a student finds he can no more cope with his studies, then he takes office. So studying and serving in office are eminently connected in Confucian thought. So, and then he also mentions, so that's the point of like cultivating yourself. And we didn't really go last class much into the not the theory, but what does the language of cultivation mean, right? So cultivation, what is that word? It literally is farming, right? Like you have a blank grass field that you have to turn into food, right? It's that activity, it's that skill of growing. And for Confucius, as a school of thought, morality is just like growth, just like growing crops. You have to grow the morality of people. And self-cultivation is also grow yourself, right? So the timing of this is also important. Now, what does that mean? Well, when you served mattered. So, he mentions here, like, it is shameful, quote, to make your salary your sole object, irrespective of whether the way prevails in the state or not. And he says the reason is that when the way does not prevail in a state, one can stay only in office by bending one's principles. So the timing is, to be a good Confucian, one should only serve in a state that is following the way. So if a state is unethical, you cannot, to be a good moral gentleman, keeping your job and being unethical. What's the Confucian perspective? Quit. And from Confucius till the 20th century, quitting was quite common. And Confucius himself quit. But in Confucian morality, if you're serving the government, this is my sparkling water, not a beer, by the way. And not soda, because I'd rather my calories be beer calories. But that's for later. But so in Confucius' system, you have to serve a state that's following the way, and if it's not following the way, you have to quit. Ethically speaking. If you bend your ethics to serve an unethical state, you are not a gentleman. So the timing is very critical here. And then there's also this theory, which he also mentions quite quickly, which is just mentioning that you need to basically focus on your job and not outside your job. And this is also part of the way. I'm slowly getting through my notes. So this actually later becomes a concept of this, but we're not going to worry about that yet. So now when they say focus on your job, not outside it, this both is in your 5 relationships and in any role you have. But remember, Confucius is normally compared with the running of the state. Now, if you wonder, Professor Zeiser, Confucius sure seems focused on the state. Why is that? Well, if you look at the classic world, and pretty much the entire world, until very recently, right, a vast majority of jobs are agricultural. Between 80 and 95%, depending on the civilization and the time and the place, almost everybody farms. So, most people are just farmers. And then if you're not a farmer, you're basically running the government, or you're a soldier, right? Or very few cities. So, generally speaking, when they say focus on your job, it's either focus. He's always normally saying focus on your role in the government, or if you're a farmer, just focus on farming. But in this case, a gentleman's not a farmer, right? A gentleman's goal is to serve the government, so focus on your job in the government. Now, this means you should do the job you're assigned. So, like, for example, I'm a professor. My job is to profess, right? To teach truth. That's my job. So, this eventually leads to the Confucian concept. Let me get my laser pointer. It's called the rectification of names. If you don't speak Chinese, this is meaningless to you, but it's literally correct to name things correctly, right? Tadashi in Japanese is correct, and Namae is just name. So this came as a full idea much further after Confucius, but it's in Confucius, this idea that you need to focus on your job, and it's an important part of governing and being moral, right? So again, it should make sense, but this is the idea that, like, if I'm a professor and I don't know, I start a political campaign, or I start trying to be a plumber, or tell plumbers how to do their job, right? I'm not doing my job anymore. In the government, this is more just the staying in your own realm, as it were. So, like, if you're the Minister of War, don't try to do diplomacy, right? Because you're getting outside of your job, suddenly you're not fulfilling the technical role of what your job is anymore. And if everybody does that, the system collapses, right? Because then who's doing their own jobs? So and you still see this in modern Asia, with a strong focus in East Asia on being the best at your thing. And it even becomes religious eventually in Zen Buddhism, which we'll get to a little bit later. All right, and rectification of names, by the way, is not in our book yet. It'll be in Mencius. So, okay, somebody asked a good question, which I'll answer now. Quote, so what would Confucius say about responsibility? As in, if the state is not following the way, is it not someone's responsibility to try and fix it? Well, that's the thing, right? So, if you're trying to fix it, well, here's the problem. If you're trying to fix it, are you overstepping the bounds of your own job? So if you are, you're not focusing on your job. And if trying to fix it causes you to break your morals, then you're also not going to be able to fix it. Does that make sense? Like, how can you fix it by being immoral? That doesn't make any sense. So, generally speaking, the way Confucius do it in practice, in real life, is, in Confucian ethics, it's totally moral for Confucian government gentlemen, right, government workers, to critique their kings or their emperors or their princes directly to their face. So then normally this would be done either by a letter, they'd send a signed letter to the emperor or the king or whatever, or they just be in his court and just tell him to his face, that's a bad idea. So in good Confucian ethics, it's thought that rulers should listen to critique from their gentlemen. But here's the thing, what happens if the ruler doesn't take your advice? Then your only recourse is to quit, right? Because what if you know someone's doing the wrong thing, but you just sit there and keep taking a salary? That the inaction is immoral. So you can give critique in the Confucian system, but if you're not listened to or you're not allowed to act, then you should quit. That's basically the answer. And again, it's not that explicit in Confucius yet. The principle's there, but it takes 2,000 years to work its full way through that. Somebody says the stream is frozen. Let's see. Looks fine on my end. The bit rate is fine. I'm not losing any frames. It's probably a Twitch thing. We'll give it in a second. Let's refresh this. Yeah, I'll hold on 1 second. I didn't lose any frames. My upload seems to be going fine. It looks like it's Twitch is pooping itself. Let's give it a second. Looks like... I'll have to upload the rest of this later. Alright, I'm also typing there. Let's see. Doop, doop. I'll give it a second, see if it starts again. It looks totally fine on my end. Weird. Let's see what it says. Man, Twitch does not like me talking about Confucius. Alright. We'll flip it back off and online again. Let's see what happens.